hope everybody's doing well this evening. It was a beautiful day here in southwest Colorado. Our neighbors, the only other people in the state park besides a camp host, left, so Terry and I are basically the only ones here. And I'm so appreciative that they did let us stay, especially with what all has happened with Terry, who is doing remarkably well. She's able to go without oxygen for significant periods of time, which, given that we're at 6,200 feet, is quite an improvement. So we're really grateful for that. But in reminiscing a bit, with all this time around, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to live in a small town or not, but we have lived in some pretty small places. In fact, we've probably never lived in what would be classified as a big city. Colorado Springs, I suppose, would be the biggest, maybe. Trying to think. Madison's pretty good sized metropolitan area, so I suppose Madison might be the biggest area that we've lived in, population-wise. But anyway, I had accepted a position from the guy that fired me to run an operation in Loup City, Nebraska. Actually, just to sell for it, but I ended up running it. I ended up owning it, but that's a whole different story, or at least owning part of it. But we moved to this little town, and if you've never lived in a small town, it's quite an experience. And people in rural areas in particular are used to taking care of one another, or looking out for, maybe that's a better word, helping one another out. So the kids are able to play and run all over town without too much worry. Somebody's looking out for them, And like my son built a tree house with his friends. They started building it in a tree in our yard, but it was right over the driveway. I was afraid they'd fall into the cement. So they found another place to build a tree house and built this great big fort. I have no idea who owned the land. Nobody seemed to care, I guess. But in a small town, it's kind of interesting. Your house, if it's a substantial house at all, people know which house you're in because of who owned it originally. So when we came to town, we were able to rent a house called the Mayhew House, and it was owned by Paul, and I don't remember his wife's name, but Paul Mayhew was an attorney in town, and he had died before we moved there. Well, apparently Paul was kind of a bit on the shady side, maybe, as attorneys go, and had quite a messy estate, including lawsuits against him for misrepresentation, and I don't know what all went on. But the house was tied up in legal wranglings, but they were able to rent it to us. And so it was this big old 1.5-story Craftsman built in like 1917, knob and tube wiring, had the old spider furnace, So we moved into that thing and really fell in love with it. The woodwork inside, it was just a cozy house. It was a little expensive on the utilities because it had almost no insulation. Lath and plaster, walls, and the old spider furnace in the basement. You can kind of picture it. It had been converted from coal to natural gas, so there was a coal bin downstairs. Andrew and I had a huge train set in the basement. But finally, after a couple of years, they did get the estate straightened out, and it came time that they had to auction that house off. Well, there were some issues about it in relation to me financing it through the bank. I don't remember exactly now, but the bank really preferred that I buy something else that had been inspected and that they knew there'd be no legal wranglings coming back or something, Anyway, whatever the reason, they were a bit reticent, and so we had picked out a couple homes that they would finance, and so the day came when they started auctioning the house off. So Um, I don't think any of us wanted to move, but in particular, my daughter really didn't want to leave that house. And so she was on the curb in tears. And so the auction starts, and I had talked with a guy and knew he was wanting to buy it. And so the auction's going along, and there were a couple people running the bidding up a little bit, and it was getting closer to where the end was coming, I thought. And this gentleman, older man, I had never met, walks up to me and says, "How come you're not bidding on your house?" And I said, "Well, I kind of went through the little bit on the bank." And he goes, "Well, look, I'll buy it for you. And you can just buy it for me. I'll finance it for you." And he helped me buy that house. I mean, he bought it. He paid for it. Somebody I had never met bought us a house and charged me, some ridiculously low interest rate on the thing. The guy's name was Melvin Elo. And it turns out I did know his kids. His son farmed the family farm, and I knew his son and daughter-in-law, and Andrew, my son, was friends with, went to school with one of his boys. But other than that, I did not, I didn't know him at all. Did not know who he was, and he ends up buying a house for us. So, that is small town life. You know what I mean? And one of those crazy lucky things that just has seemed to always happen to me throughout life. So Melvin, thanks, man. I really appreciate what you did for us that day. It really made life simpler for us. I so appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for watching.